Our orders are to intercept, investigate, and take whatever action is necessary and possible.
Welcome to another episode of the Arkham Sessions. My name is Brian Ward. With me, as always, the psychologist to the superheroes, superheroines, and supervillains of Gotham City, and now somewhere in the Alpha Quadrant, Dr. Drea Letamendi. Hello, Drea.
Hi, Brian. How are you?
I'm great. I am energized. I am feeling refreshed. We just got back from a major vacation that we really needed, and now I'm enthusiastic. I'm even if I'm not ready to necessarily go back to work, I am ready to talk all things Star Trek with you. How are you feeling?
I feel great. I mean, this is exploring the final frontier.
Yeah.
This is super exhilarating because there are few limitations. This is a franchise or an IP that involves what I would consider a foundation of real science.
Sure.
This has been the reputation of the storytelling, so that excites me.
Yeah.
And I also feel like I need to put a disclaimer or a disclosure out there for folks to know that we are going to cover essentially the first 6 movies in the Star Trek universe, and I have not seen the episodes that these movies are based on. Does that make sense? Like, I've not seen the original series. I've seen a handful of scenes. I've seen maybe I can
you
count
have seen
on
a handful
one hand.
of episodes.
Yeah, I was going to say I can count on one hand the number of episodes I've probably seen.
Right.
Not a huge fan of the original series, but I have an open mind. And again, there's this sense of this is such an exploratory, open-minded storytelling. Mm-hmm. So why not come into it with the same level of curiosity, wonder, and some humility that I can probably learn something from this.
Yeah.
And I might enjoy it.
I think you'll enjoy it, especially given the fact that you love hard science in your science fiction. Like you don't just like space fantasy. You also like.
Yes, as I've said, I like my sci-fi hard.
Yeah, this is the hardest of the sci-fi that you.
And I have to admit, like the Tribble stuff, the original series seems kind of campy, and I'm averse to, like, that doesn't feel. It feels sort of too, I don't know. It feels like it's making fun of it. And I think this is coming from someone who has not seen enough Star Trek from that era to respect it. I've seen a ton of Next Gen episodes, and obviously Picard season. Like, I've seen a bunch of Star Trek, but the original, the pioneers, if you will, mm-hmm. I'm less familiar. And I have a weird bias. It's not a big
Star Wars bias?
No. I think it's mostly like, that's not my generation. It's not my Star Trek.
Yeah.
So am I going to enjoy it as much? And a little spoiler for our listeners, I really, really liked this movie that we're about to talk about.
Oh, you did? We haven't talked about it.
I really, really liked it. And I think I've heard rumors that it is not a favorite of the 6.
It is the least favorite of the 6.
So what does that mean for
most
me?
people?
That's so interesting.
You know what? That's not true.
Okay.
That's not true. I'll wait until we get there before talking about what is probably the least favorite of the 6. But most people joke that there's no motion in this motion picture.
But there's emotion.
That is very true.
Which is the invisible action that some of us need in our lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we get into that, I can already tell you're excited. We got to do a little bit of housekeeping. I need to go ahead and I need to express my deepest apologies to our listeners. I heard you. There were a couple of mistakes that I made in the last episode of our Star Wars analysis. One of those was that I didn't catch when we learned that one of the kids was in fact Palpatine's child. I guess it was the father of Rey is Palpatine's child, and you caught that. And I think it was one of those moments where I was just sort of glazed over. I didn't hear it, but people corrected me. And for the record, I already knew before we put the episode up that was the case. I went and looked at it and was like, I'm not going to go back and like change the episode, but everyone,
you did. I think
our
you
listeners
did,
caught it.
Sure, and you did show like there was some doubt. You weren't like 1,000%.
Yeah, I expressed that I could have been wrong.
Yeah,
I was wrong. I was totally wrong. And then there was one other one, but now I can't remember what that is. But it was another place where I said I could have been wrong. And it turns out
was
I
it
was
about
wrong.
the clones?
The clones? No.
Okay.
No, but I don't remember what it was now. It's been a little while since the tweets came at us. Because like I said, we just went on vacation, but I just wanted to say, especially about that one. Yeah, I missed it. I totally missed it. That being said, I do think we do have one more audience question, to respond to before we completely wrap up Star Wars. Is that correct?
That's right. We have a voice message from David Nett, a friend of ours and the founder of Hero's Journey Gym. We'll go ahead and play that if you have it.
Hey, Drea and Brian, this is David Nett from Hero's Journey Fitness. I just finished listening to The Last Jedi episode. I'm an episode behind. And I really loved your thoughtful analysis of this movie that I love very much. I especially love Luke Skywalker in this movie. Luke Skywalker is my first and greatest hero. I was 4 years old when I saw the first Star Wars movie in the theater in 1977, and he will always be among my greatest heroes. But I wonder what you two thought of his end in The Last Jedi. We talked about how we saw him in the beginning. You talked about that, not we. I wonder how you see his end. Did Luke Skywalker, I wonder, commit suicide at the end of The Last Jedi? He says that he wants to die earlier in the movie, and I wonder if he simply doesn't choose to at the end. And given the relatively low stakes of death for a Jedi Master, as we've seen throughout the Star Wars universe, merging with the Force and becoming a Force ghost, does that really matter? I'm curious largely because I know a lot of Star Wars fans, myself included, suffer from major depression, and seeing a Luke in this movie that seemed to be struggling with the same things that I've struggled with really made an impact on me. Anyway, I would love to hear your thoughts, and thank you for all you do. Bye-bye.
So that's a very good question from our friend David Nett. Drea, would you call... I realize if someone sacrifices themselves, it would be a suicide to some... I mean, you're giving up your life knowing that you know... So is that considered a suicide,
well, normally,
a sacrifice?
Yeah, normally in war, in the middle of combat, it's seen as a heroic sacrifice.
Yeah.
I don't know that in this moment, in and of itself, we think that he suicides. But David makes an excellent point that really made me rethink this. This is somebody who, as we talked about, had isolated themselves on an island and had essentially, I don't know, for lack of better words, I'd say like disappeared.
Yeah. Fallen into a deep depression at the very least.
Full of self-doubt, feelings
Yes.
of failure,
Yes.
transitioning to a part of their life where they're kind of erasing themselves. And that is a form of suicide. On the show, we've talked about the concept of pseudo-suicide, which came up during a Loki episode where Loki would make people believe through illusion that multiple times that he had died, not necessarily by killing himself, but he would make people believe that. And there's a sense of a yearning or desire to be gone, to disappear. And there's some truth to this. Luke was in a sense of despair and a sense of losing his purpose, which I think is a really critical thing here. So he erases himself. So yes, I think in some way this is an action that he willingly participates in, knows that this is the end of this life.
At the end when he goes up against Kylo Ren.
Yes. So there's some idea here that he is willing to die and has a desire to die and puts that action to purpose because he ends up saving a bunch of people. In the same way that Ben did.
I mean, Ben even said, if you strike me down, I will become more powerful.
Original Ben.
Sorry, yes, Ben Kenobi.
I was like, which Ben?
Sorry, yes, Ben Kenobi. I would say that Luke suicided in the same way that Obi-Wan Kenobi suicided.
It wasn't until I was older that I realized that loss was a willful one, a willful, like that he had the desire that was his time to go.
Yeah.
Ben, original Ben, OG Ben.
Yeah.
I also think it's important to see this character because of the decades of putting him on a pedestal as being a hero. It's important to show some sense of humanity, some sense of what I think most people want to call flaws, but is just really human life. The likelihood of feeling depressed, as David said in the message, the chronic despair that a lot of us kind of live with and manage, and it fills our decision making. It fills our perspective. It kind of becomes something we exist with, and Luke has to manage that. And I think seeing that in a character who's meant to be this figure of heroism is like a concept to reckon with, a concept to welcome. The other piece of this that is interesting is, does he know he's going to become a ghost Jedi?
I believe that he does. Well, I also want to step back just one quick second, because I want to make sure that we are clear to our audience. I do not think he suicides at the end because of his exile and his depression, right? He is getting back into the fight the only way that he can in this moment. So he has taken a step forward from the depression and the self-exile to actually fight for a bigger cause than himself.
Yes, again, regaining purpose.
That is correct. I want to make it clear that we are not suggesting that because he was self-exiled, that's why he decided to take his own life at the end of the movie. That is not what we're saying. But I do believe he knew that he would become a Force ghost. I believe he was probably already trained in how to become a Force ghost at some point. Because as we've learned since Jedi and some of the Clone Wars episodes and stuff like that, you kind of have to be taught how to do it. Qui-Gon comes to Yoda, teaches Yoda. Yoda becomes a Force ghost, presumably taught. I mean, somebody taught Anakin, because older Anakin shows up at the end of Jedi.
That's weird. Who taught Anakin?
Yeah, who taught Anakin? And then Obi-Wan is taught, and we see in the Obi-Wan series he meets up with Qui-Gon. So it's very possible. I believe that people have taught each other, and so I'm assuming Luke is also taught, and probably taught Leia, because she shows up at the end of Rise of Skywalker as well, right? She and Luke are together. They're Force ghosts when they look over at her as she's trying to decide what family name to take. Or did I make that up?
I do not remember this.
Yeah, I made that up. Maybe that's
that would have been very sweet.
Maybe that's another one of those. I thought she looked over the lady's shoulder or something and saw the two of them. You know what? That would have not worked, because Leia wouldn't, she wasn't around to shoot that shot. Maybe, I don't know. Maybe I read it in a book. Maybe I read it in a novelization. Anyway, So anyway, I do think that he knew that he would become something bigger and more powerful. And then I think he ultimately moved over from one life to the next. To David's point about low stakes, given that he's a Jedi, I don't know that I would see it as low stakes, but I would agree that he knew that he wasn't done, that he would move over into a new capacity. Again, the same way that Obi-Wan did in Star Wars. It's a really good question, though.
It is. I think that what you're uplifting is really important, which, again, is that a heroic figure has moments where they're not their best. They're not finding purpose. They feel a disconnection. They feel they're off track. And as we talked about on that episode, our ability to be observing his struggle there and to see why he's there in the first place, but also how he overcomes that state of mind.
Yeah.
Ultimately he does make a sacrifice, but again, it has this sense of purpose. It has this bigger meaning to it that isn't strictly about ending his pain. And that, I think, is the distinction, is that he is essentially, he has a willingness to end his life, not to end his individual pain, but to be in service to the community of people that he's saving, and knowing that maybe he and he alone can do this, that this has a specific individual purpose for him. I do want to mention, we've been talking about suicide for the majority of the opening of this episode. For folks in the US, if you are thinking about this subject deeply and you want someone to talk to, please pick up the phone, dial 988. It is our national suicide hotline. There's also international lines. All you have to do is Google your country and then the word suicide hotline, and it will come up. So again, as listeners, if this is provocative to you, you feel like you want to continue to talk about this, you need someone to talk to, I encourage you to use those lifelines or talk to a therapist that you are connected with, or a friend or family member who you trust.
Excellent. So, Drea, let me tell you a little story about Star Trek.
Okay.
In 1966.
Oh, wow.
The same year as Batman, Star Trek premiered. Didn't get great numbers. I mean, if you think about it, there were like 3 networks at the time, and it still wasn't doing especially well. Just well enough to hang on for 2 more seasons, but then after the 3rd season, it was canceled. It was Gene Roddenberry's attempt to make society better through allegory. He was taking very real societal problems, and he was trying to address them through a science fiction Western type TV show.
And am I out of term to say he wanted to portray the world, if not the universe, not as this is how we are, but this is how we should be?
That is correct. The flaw in Roddenberry's approach and his declaration of what the show should be is that humanity has gotten over all of its problems. We're now a perfect society. And now we're going around the universe making other worlds perfect societies through Starfleet, through the Federation, the United Federation of Planets.
Okay, so humans are superior and wanting to take these values to other
It's not that the
places.
humans are superior. It's that the humans have learned from our mistakes. And now we're going around and trying to teach other worlds, don't be like us. And he's taking the very real turmoil of the 60s and trying to project a future in which we don't have any of the problems that we were having at the time.
So in order to create a show worth watching, there has to be conflict. So
Yes.
it's in the
And there's the crux of the problem.
so it's the aliens that they encounter in these various planets and these other ships, these other societies running around, running amok.
Yep.
How's that?
Yep.
Yep.
Amok. Oh, I get it.
Yeah. That.
And you said you've not
I
seen
know.
any episodes.
I may have seen a Star Trek or two. Yeah, I mean, I understand the integrity around this, both from wanting to move forward the science that already exists and also the social intelligence, relational intelligence that already not only is starting to exist, but should also advance. This is how you portray that. I don't really see anything wrong with this.
What's wrong with it is if you're a writer of television and you're trying to create interesting stories, as you said, conflict is where those interesting stories come from. Roddenberry had made it a point to say so much that, none of the crew members should be at odds with one another. They're like, we're beyond that. Well, that makes for a really boring TV show because now all the crew members, they are, family and friends and there is no conflict whatsoever, only with outside parties, makes it for a very boring television series. Now, I will say that there was always a little bit of strife between Dr. McCoy and Spock. But we'll talk about why in a moment. But yeah, around the time of Next Generation, the writers started sort of taking that and dismissing it a little bit. Gene wasn't as active in Next Gen as a lot of people would believe. And the writers of those shows would create conflict amongst their hero characters. I mean, it just makes for a more interesting story and a more realistic story. And you can still create good allegory by doing that. So yeah, Star Trek was then canceled in 1969 and was sort of left for dead. Gene and Paramount had been trying to think of ways in which they could create a movie for this series because in reruns, it was actually more popular than it ever was in its regular airing time. And time after time after time, it just wasn't working out. So Paramount was then going to create a fourth network, a Paramount Plus, if you will. They were going to create a Paramount TV station, and they were going to lead it off with Star Trek Phase 2 was the name of the next series. And everybody was going to come back. Potentially with less involvement from Leonard Nimoy, who plays Spock. But everyone else had signed on, and they had created a handful of characters that could potentially replace Kirk and Spock should they get too expensive down the road. And then Star Wars came out in 1977. And the idea for the new TV series was jettisoned in lieu of, we're going to make the motion picture instead. So they took the 2-hour pilot script for that series and they revamped it to create Star Trek the Motion Picture. A lot of it was rewritten several times. So it didn't even really look like that original pilot script anymore. Star Trek the Motion Picture was then developed. You'll recognize a couple of the characters from what would have been the TV series. Captain Willard Decker would have been a member of the TV series. Lieutenant Ilea would have been a member of the TV series. And then one other character that never made it into the movie, though the actor was, he was going to be another Vulcan. Actually, he was going to be another half human, half Vulcan, and he was going to be Spock's cousin. But I believe his name was Jean, Xon. And he was going to sort of be the new science officer, and that's because Leonard and Gene were not getting along. Leonard had sued Paramount for using his likeness on merchandising without getting money for it. Gene did not stand up for him and it created
conflict
amongst the family.
Well, there it is.
So they were trying to create a new Spock, which they kind of allude to at the very beginning of this episode, where or in the very beginning of this movie, where Kirk is announcing, I'm coming back on board the ship. I'm going to take the ship. And I need you to get me, or he is actually going to bring in a Vulcan character. But that Vulcan is eaten up by the transporter pad. And he's like, get me another Vulcan. I need a Vulcan. Everybody knows I need a Vulcan as my chief science officer. And Spock comes back. But yeah, I mean, Persis Khambatta was cast for the TV series. She then played Lieutenant Ilia in the movie. And Stephen Collins would have been Decker.
Folks would remember or recognize Stephen Collins from the television series Seventh Heaven.
Or the news in like 2014.
That's my association. Before this movie, I don't think he had really done anything, did he?
That's not, no, before it was, I think he had done television. After this movie is actually where I really knew him from, because I never watched Seventh Heaven, not my jam. But I knew him as the Indiana Jones-like character from a TV series called Tales of the Gold Monkey, which was actually pitched before Raiders of the Lost Ark was made. But then after the success of Raiders, they decided to make it.
I know we're going to go off the rails here. So bringing us back, just so that I understand the positionality or the timing of this. This is 1979, this film.
Yeah, this would have been, yeah.
So it's after the first Star Wars movie, after Planet of the Apes, which I'll circle back to this, after 2001 Space Odyssey. There's some what I would consider milestone science fiction films in this era. This is like a pivotal
Andromeda Strain
era.
would have been before this.
So a bunch of things came before this that I think they're important to setting the tone. And what I would consider, aside from Star Wars, which I think Star Wars really turned things on its side, being a Western and being as adventurous as it was, there was a lot of slow and serious science fiction cinema. This is similar to that. I'm not saying that it's not fun. I'm just saying there's a very serious tone to this.
Yeah, it is very serious. There are fun moments, but this is a very serious film. It's, like I said, hard science. But I mean, here's the thing. What's interesting is when they decided to make the movie, they then went and got one of the greatest film directors of his generation in Robert Wise to come in and make this movie. And it seems like a really odd choice, because this is a guy who won the Academy Award for like West Side Story, The Sound of Music, but he had also been the film editor for Citizen Kane, often considered the greatest motion picture of all time. He had made science fiction before, because he made The Day the Earth Stood Still. He'd also made The Andromeda Strain in 1971. So he wasn't completely foreign to science fiction storytelling, but yeah, you took like this guy who was a big heavy hitter in other genres, predominantly musicals, Or at least the ones that he got the most success with were musicals. I'm not going to say most of his film oeuvre was.
So, I know that there's a mixture of responses to this film. The reason I bring up what kind of film it was is not that there was fatigue around the tone of this kind of science fiction. I mean, there's a lot in that bucket that is forever recognized. Close Encounters was another science fiction film with some serious storytelling to it that came before this movie. So I'm not saying that there was fatigue around this, but you're saying there was some mixed responses. Was this not what people or audiences expected? Was there... I noticed right away the uniforms are not those bright colors, the red and blue and yellow, right? These are beige, neutral colors.
Blue, like a light powdery blue, white and gray. I mean,
and even at that time, because we're looking at restored film, like at the time, probably even more muted.
Yeah, it's a very drab looking movie. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And the majority of the film, if not all of it really, take place on the ship and basically on the bridge, which is also a very muted, not very attractive looking place. When you consider that in 66, they're dealing with a lot of primary colors. The bridge is bright. It's gray and black and red and
of course,
lots
it's
of
like
colors.
We have
buttons.
color TV now. Let's embrace that.
Yeah. Well, Robert Wise took it in a completely different direction and made it look more cinematic for sure. Because you do look at things like the Enterprise. The Enterprise from the TV series never would have made it on the big screen. And so that's when the NCC 1701 was refitted.
Okay. So set up again, someone like me has not seen the series, but I caught on right away to what was going on. This is a semi-retired admiral, a former captain named Captain Kirk, basically rejoining a mission.
Well, so Admiral Kirk is not retired. He is simply no longer the captain of a starship. And we learn from Captain Decker that Kirk hasn't logged a space hour in 2.5 years. So at minimum, he's not been at the helm of a starship in 2.5 years. In the last 18 months, Willard Decker, former commander, now captain, has been overseeing the refit of the old Enterprise. A refit, for those who aren't familiar, would be basically if you decided to renovate your house and you kept the bones of it, but you built around it and just basically created a new house. The Enterprise basically looks the same as the one from 66, but also looks much better, much more cinematic, much more realistic. And that is the argument, is that this is the same Enterprise, but it's a very different Enterprise. So much so that when Admiral Kirk comes on board and announces that he is going to take over the vessel from Captain Decker, he receives pushback because Decker's like, I'm an engineer. I've literally been with this for 18 months. I know the ship like the back of my hand. You don't know it at all because it's not at all the same ship. It might as well be different altogether. And Kirk says, well, that's why I'm keeping you on as my XO, my right-hand man for this mission. What is the mission? The mission is basically a viewing station out in the middle of nowhere, has seen a cloud in space completely annihilate with weaponry we've never seen before 3 Klingon
birds of prey
battle cruisers.
Oh, who has the birds of prey?
Klingons,
Oh,
but that's
so I
not.
wasn't
It's
too off.
sort of like how we've got battleships, destroyers, aircraft carriers. They've got these ships that look very similar to the ones they did in the original series, But the birds of prey are the ones that are green and have the hulking, like, they look like birds.
Yeah.
Also designed to look like linebackers, but that's a different movie altogether. We just see as these 3 Klingon ships are annihilated by basically these electricity plasma torpedoes. It's terrifying. And then they were like, well, this cloud's like 3 days away from Earth, and they're coming straight for us. Earth is basically the home of the Federation. So that's not good. The Enterprise is sent off in an intercept course. And while on that intercept course, they literally witnessed the destruction of that outpost that witnessed the whole thing to begin with. So this is a really big deal. They do bring a member of the crew out of retirement, as you were talking about retirement. Mm-hmm. Dr. Bones McCoy is brought out of retirement at the urging of Kirk because he really needs him. He's one of the trifecta. You and I have always talked about Batman as having been this trifecta. That you've got Batman, you've got Bruce, and you've got Bruce Wayne. And Bruce is sort of the combination of the two. He's the real person.
What I've articulated is that the 3 personas are not masks. They're not like fabricated personalities, that all 3 have some honesty to them. They're all a part of his psychological dynamic. And that you're right. I believe that the person we're calling Bruce is the most integrated version of his identity, of his self. And that at times he slips into not like multiple personalities, but more like the tendencies for some behaviors and thoughts and feelings that he can kind of get overindulgent with being Batman and be risky and self-harming and isolated. And Bruce Wayne is another version of himself that serves its own purpose.
Yes.
So that has been, a trifecta within one integrated personality.
So imagine that exact same trifecta, but now put Kirk as Bruce, and I'll say Spock as Batman. Cold, calculating,
logical,
will do what he needs to do to get the job done. And then the more humanity-based side is McCoy. Wears his emotions on his sleeve. And without those 2 people next to him, Kirk can't be Kirk. He needs the 2 of them or he's out of whack. So with that in mind, we see in the very beginning of the film, Spock is in the middle of a proceeding, a ceremony, the Kolinar, where he has basically achieved perfect, total logic, emotionless attitudes of his home people, the Vulcan people. He just keeps getting called back to space.
My understanding, this is the first time I've seen Kolinar.
The Kolinar. Yep.
And my understanding is that this is a rite of passage.
Yes.
It is a typical process where a learner kind of advances to fully being integrated or fully being accepted as a person in the Vulcan society. You have demonstrated that you have the virtues, the values, the behaviors of what it means to be Vulcan, which is purely logical. And this is seen as very, not only important, but very valued. You cannot be a part of us if you're not this. Like it's a very strict, it's very binary, right?
And the reason for that, just to give you a little bit of context, the reason for that is that, so if you think of them as the Jedi, generations before, they were a violent people. And they believed that their emotions are what were making them that way. And so over generations, eons now, the Vulcans have learned to suppress all of their emotions in order to only attain the highest form of logic, and they run their lives that way. It's not that they're not emotional. It's that you do not receive the Kolinar until you have learned.
This is a socialization.
To suppress,
Yeah.
correct.
I get that.
And because Spock is half human and half Vulcan, his blood is not as cold as it should be. And he does, in fact, sort of fail this test.
So I have a question for you.
Yep.
I understand that Spock is half human, half Vulcan. I understand that Vulcans are not human. But what you just described is in their society, they essentially rise up in their own social interpersonal capacity to be logical. But they also, this is just me now conjecturing, I imagine there is something in their neurological mechanisms. Mm-hmm. There is something genetic about their ability to be logical. Like no human could pass this test. There is something specific to the Vulcan race about being logical.
I mean, I think you're probably talking about, and look, I'm going to say it again. I'm sure it's in a book somewhere. I'm sure at some point they have evolved. Like their people have evolved to make it easier for this to happen. But you could also say that that's a potential, I mean, this is for you to discuss. That's a potential nature versus nurture situation where if every child born unto an entire planet of people are brought up the same way over generations, would they all just naturally start falling in line? I do not know the solid answer to that question, but I would imagine that over time it is easier for Vulcans, for pure-blooded Vulcans, to be more logical than it is for Spock.
Yes. Well, it is logical to assume that their limbic system is different than humans. Our limbic system, that like reptilian, what people call the reptilian part of the brain, like over centuries has evolved for the intelligence that we have the capacity for. But I would conjecture that there is a different brain structure. When I said their neurological makeup, I sort of mean that maybe their brain structure is different. And to your point, yes, that's how we evolved. Our brain structure is different than our former selves. So that was kind of my question. Him being half Vulcan, half human, I realize what I'm about to ask. Where's the compassion for understanding that he thinks differently? He is neurodivergent.
But he's not,
and so where is the Vulcan's level of capacity of compassion for? I realize what I'm asking.
You're
it's
now
ridiculous.
Asking a very contemporary question, where you could say that this movie was ahead of its time. The Vulcan people do not have compassion for that.
Exactly.
For that divergent thinking.
Yeah. And so what I gained from that scene was devastation. Like so it's so interesting.
She's supposed to put a ceremonial necklace pendant on him. And when she does a mind meld with him, because she can see that he's a little, I should say, distracted. She does a mind meld with him and determines that he is actually being called to space. Now, we as the audience are like, oh, that's just a human yearning to go up into space. Later, we find out that the cloud, known as V'ger, is actually communicating with him.
Like he is able to sense and perceive
he is
this
sensing
higher level of communication.
Correct.
So she is sensing that he has like some kind of yearning or curiosity for something beyond what
he's not fully
he's supposed to be paying attention to.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he's distracted.
Because we find out he was supposed to be, when he shows back onto the Enterprise, Kirk even makes the statement like, oh, I thought you were on Vulcan for good, like from here on out. And Vulcans, by the way, live hundreds of years. And so that's a big deal. Like
well, and that's what broke my heart a little bit, is that he's experiencing this significant rejection. He's basically being told, you don't belong with us. You don't have what it takes.
It's heartbreaking.
You are showing a weakness.
Yeah.
And he doesn't even get to be devastated about that. Does that make sense? Like he's given this experience of grief.
His reaction should be, it's perfectly logical for you to tell me I can't be a part of this.
That's the expectation.
But you see him pick up the pendant because she just simply drops it.
Oh my gosh.
Rather than take it back into the temple for like the next
I think she has some emotion here. She like,
drops it in front of him as if to not mock him, but as if to sort of poke him with this.
Yeah, that's emotional.
And he picks it up. He picks it up and looks at it as if to be like, this could have, this should be mine.
Right.
Could have been mine. And by the way, I think that he had probably reached that level of Kolinar. I think he had closed himself off. If it had not been for this thing communicating to him and his curiosity about it, I think he probably would have walked away with that pendant.
Well, and that's what makes me sad watching this, is that he's not even allowed to express that sense of devastation and sadness. Yes, the grief. He's supposed to just kind of accept it and what? Like leave the planet, not be a part of society? Like, I guess he's going to go to where Luke went to isolate himself for the rest of his life.
Yeah.
But you're right. So there's this calling. He ends up on the ship with the 2/3 of the trio. Now, you mentioned Batman, Bruce Wayne, and Bruce. I see them as the id, the ego, and superego, which I know all of these categories have a historical Freudian association, and that's factual, that's true. And yet, as we also move along with the times and evolve with those concepts, think of them more of symbology rather than like hard facts that were only made of these three components.
Yeah.
The id being kind of the instinctive, the human reflex, right?
Right.
These are, this is pleasure seeking. This is emotional. This is kind of how humans are born. This is the subconscious, the ego. So that would be, of course, Bones.
Right.
The ego is, a sense of rationality, but kind of having a real world aspect or perspective here. So there's a consciousness, there's kind of an integration here of the other parts. And that consciousness is very grounded in like, what is the more sophisticated level of reality? The superego would be Spock. So this is an absolute sense of what is right and wrong, probably more from a sense of principle versus the subconscious or experience. And these three components kind of course, need to work together in our personalities in order for us to make decisions, to be accepted into society, to kind of go about how we would in our interpersonal worlds. And that's how I see the three of these characters.
You would not be wrong.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I mean, I think I call those things Bruce Wayne and Batman, but yes, if you're going to get textbook about it, I think you're absolutely right.
That's my job.
And I think that was on purpose. No one has ever said that these three people are not basically the the Enterprise. I mean, you could probably get rid of just about anyone else. And as long as you got these three people, you have the moral makeup of that ship.
It's really interesting that I very much like Bones in this film. Like, he is...
Tell me more about that. Because you're a Spock chick if I've ever seen one. But tell me more about why you like Bones.
There was something kind of, maybe it is how he represents humanity. Maybe it is the simple power of what it means to not let logic overwhelm you or lead you too much, but to think about what is the right thing to do. Again, not from principles, but from the gut, from what your values are, and from what your purpose is and what other people's purposes are, if that makes sense. Like, I think it's his emotional intelligence and his knowledge about, he knows how other people tick. So as soon as he's brought on to the ship, he has conversations with Kirk that tell us that Kirk might be a good leader, and he, at least by his friend's account, can let his ego, that's not a coincidence, get in the way.
Yeah.
And it's Bones who tells him, like, are you doing this because you care about the mission, or are you letting your sense of pride and what you represent like eclipse what this is all about?
I know the conversation that you're talking about, and I've got that audio, but I'll even go so far as to say a perfect example is prior to Spock coming on board, when I told you that he needs both of them. Kirk is imbalanced in the beginning of this movie. And there's a moment where he's sort of yelling at engineering and yelling at other people on the bridge. We've got to do this. We've got to go to warp. And you've got engineers telling him, sir, we really shouldn't do that. And he's like, no, this is how it has to be. And who leans over his shoulder and says, Jim, you're pushing them? You know, like he immediately calms Jim down in that moment because Jim is out of balance. He doesn't have his other person. By the way, I don't think there's any coincidence that Spock Spock is all the cold, hard sciences of astronomy and this and that. Like he is the chief science officer for everything except bodies. People.
Humans. Yeah.
But McCoy can also work on...
yes, people.
But living beings are not Spock's thing. That's McCoy. And McCoy is not... He'll let you know. He's not responsible for any of those other sciences.
He reminds everyone which kind of doctor he is.
Correct.
Play the clip where he puts his friend, Captain Kirk, in check.
Okay, so to set this up, Decker was relieved of duty. He was supposed to be the captain of the ship. Kirk took it upon himself to convince the powers that be to allow him to come take control of the ship because he had more experience. And there's a moment here where Bones sort of puts him in check. Here we go. Let's take a listen.
Make your point, Doctor.
The point, Captain, is that it's you who's competing. You ram getting this command down Starfleet's throat. You've used this emergency to get the Enterprise back.
And I intend to keep her? Is that what you're saying?
Yes. It's an obsession. An obsession that can blind you to far more immediate and critical responsibilities. Your reaction to Decker is an example, Jim.
My guess is that they have a history here where Bones has seen the so-called blinding happen, being blinded by an obsession. I guess my question for you is, what is the obsession? Is it just to be with the ship? Like, is he attached to this ship? That's his obsession?
If Kirk isn't the captain of the Enterprise, he's nobody.
Would I be out of turn to say this is about control? Like, his obsession is about him needing to be in absolute control?
Well, let's talk about that. Is it about him needing to be in control? I would say no, because there's a moment in which on the bridge, by going against his engineer's best judgment, he insists they go into warp. It creates a wormhole, which nearly puts them in jeopardy. He orders that Chekhov arm the phasers. The engineer turned Captain Decker, who knows the ship better, knows that this is a bad idea, corrects him, belays that order, which you wouldn't do on the bridge with the captain there. But has the right reaction. He then explains to Kirk why it is this way, and that's actually what happens right before the scene that we just heard. And Kirk agrees with him. He says, "Oh, then you acted correctly. Like you had information I didn't have." So it's not the need to be in control. However, I would almost, and I'm doing everything I can not to move into the second movie, because we do learn a little bit about Kirk's past that suggests that he can't not be in control. But I also will argue against that as well. But it's also, I would almost say, an addiction or a loss of perspective about who he could be if he's not similar to Batman, getting that adrenaline fix every night.
So he's kind of, he likes winning. He wants to be in the action. He has this desire or this urge or this hunger. As so many people who are at that age of retirement, you think of law enforcement, you think of military, you think of people who are like, I'm not ready to go. My people still need me. I want to be out there. There is that sense of, who am I if I'm not doing what I've been doing my entire life, which is work for Starfleet. And going back to Bones and why I like him so much here is that you're right. There is this like bedside manner. He is a medical doctor, so he's very science-based. There is something warm and kind of like very understanding. And he makes a comment. He's still, I think, perseverating on this concept a little bit that this could get out of hand, that Kirk could let his obsession kind of take over. And he says, how do we know he won't put his own interests above the Enterprise? And
you're talking about Spock.
Yes. Oh, sorry. Yes. When Spock joins them and they know, well, I mean, let's talk about how he shows up.
Yeah.
The crew is
elated.
They're so happy to see him. Their smiles are ear to ear. They articulate this verbally. They show it in their expressions and their behavior. And
even
their
McCoy says,
posture.
I'm so glad to see you.
It is such a warm welcome.
Yeah.
And Spock is rigid and expressionless and cold.
Yes.
And he just goes right to work. He has no response. And I understand this as he has essentially failed the test and needs to, I don't know, like reclaim his logical senses, that he needs to work on how to be a better Vulcan, and therefore cannot give in to any emotional response. It's such an interesting scene. And then later, I think it's Kirk and Bones that are wondering, how do we know he's not going to put his own special interests above the mission or above the Enterprise? Because he seems to be having his own obsession about
Yeah.
what this super intelligence is. He's kind of fixated on being connected with this higher being, this advanced being. And then they ponder this, and then they wonder, like, well, how do we know that about any of us? It might be Bones who says this, but it's this concept of like, none of us are better. None of us are exempt from this concept of putting our needs before others. And that's the common
Again, just wait. Just
oh
wait.
gosh, I'm so close to movie 2. I know it. But that's kind of the common, I want to say, like, concern around someone who's in leadership. Like, how do I check myself? How do I make sure that I'm not putting my needs above the needs of
The many?
many other group peoples? I'm trying to stay away from that quote because I know we're not there yet. Anyway, I really love the dynamic. I was very entertained. The dialogue kind of had me just connected to
Yeah.
what was going on. The backdrop of this is there is an imminent danger, this potential for an annihilation.
Yeah.
And the stakes are high, but the dialogue is about one another and about what it takes to come up against this high level of risk. So it's, I mean, obviously I'm sort of trying to relate to it a little bit, but I think that that's a valuable, like, I'm finding a lot of value in this dialogue.
I should also tell you, and I should tell the audience too, because the audience in some cases might be listening to this and going, like, if you've seen the motion picture a million times and you're like, I don't remember that. Some of the stuff that you're actually bringing up in the quotes and the scenes that we're playing for our audience are actually part of the director's cut. So not all of this that you are bringing up right now was even a part of the theatrical version of this movie. So just think about all the things you liked about this movie and a lot of it not being there.
Oh, that's too bad.
Until much later, actually during the DVD, the original DVD release of it, when Robert Wise got back together and they cut together his director's cut and sort of loosely tried to create some special, like finish some of the special effects. It wasn't really until recently that they actually did finish it and polish it and make it, it is legit. But yeah, some of those things that you liked about this film, a lot of people might not even be familiar with. So if you've not seen the director's cut, I highly recommend checking it out because it really does make the movie light years better.
Can you talk about Lieutenant Ilea a little bit? This is a character who is a Delton, right? She is interesting.
In what way? Tell me why you think she is interesting, and I will try to talk about it.
She sort of comes across as Vulcan as well in a different way. Very to the point, direct. We're not getting conversation. We're not getting a like colloquial, affective humor, sarcasm. Like there's a little bit of that with some of our main characters. She's very, very to the point.
Well, so Deltons are known for a particular level of attraction. They are sexual beings, which is why and you even mentioned this when we watched the movie, when he says, hey, good to have you.
Oh, when Kirk welcomes her.
And she makes it clear that her oath of celibacy is in full gear. It's because in order to serve in Starfleet, Deltons from Delta 4 have to take an oath of celibacy. Like otherwise gets too messy. Things get in the way. And as we know, she clearly has a history with Decker because she instantly recognizes him, lots of sparks happening between them.
They have been in some kind of romantic relationship.
Yeah. Well, he
in the
met her
past.
on her home planet.
Okay,
Like
so
he was
that-
stationed there.
Okay.
And so he says, oh yeah, I was stationed on her home planet, Delta 4 for a while. Like they know each other.
Was that before or after her oath?
I believe probably before. I'm not going to go reading a book about it, but it was probably before. But she even says later, because he was like, he says something about when he had to leave, and she was like, oh, is that before or after you left without saying goodbye? Like clearly he left without ending the relationship. So there was heartbreak on her side. But that's her deal. I do not necessarily know why the robotic nature, to the best of my knowledge, she's the first representation of a Deltan we've seen in Star Trek. I don't remember there being anybody from Delta 4 in the original series. And if I'm honest, I don't really remember a lot of representation after the motion picture.
You say that she's robotic. I would agree, but it sounds like you're saying a robotic style and sensuality are on separate sides of the spectrum. I mean, they're not orthogonal. So that might, in other words, like that presentation may be in their society.
Yeah.
Very desirable.
By the way, I should also give credit to Roddenberry for the creation of Ilea, because she originally, as I mentioned, they were sort of looking for ways to write Kirk and or Spock out of the series should they need to. And they decided, well, we're going to create a female bridge character, but she really wasn't in any way developed. And Roddenberry, to his credit, said, I don't think this character is serving our need for diversity and inclusion on the bridge. We need to create a character that's not just seen as a tentpole lady character on the bridge, similar to like we had seen with Nurse Chapel or Yeoman Rand, those sorts of characters previously. And as we see in this film, Nurse Chapel has now gotten her MD. She's now Dr. Chapel. And Rand is at the transporter. She's maybe a transporter chief now. But the reason Ilea exists is because Gene was like, the character that you're creating is not helping us. We need a more in-depth, we need a better version. And so they choose an actress in Persis Khambatta who is Indian to serve as a little bit of, if nothing else, cultural diversity. It was also incredibly important to him that she be bald.
Oh, interesting.
And the studio was so anti this. They were like, audiences are really they're not going to connect to her if she's a pretty lady but bald. Because this is a woman who was,
oh my gosh, she is stunning.
She was a like in like the Miss Universe pageant.
Oh
like
wow,
she was.
She didn't
pageant.
need hair. Like her. Well, I would say that, but I would also say her head is beautiful. Like
perfectly symmetrical. Like, no bumps of any kind.
Yeah, she's incredibly attractive. And this is, I appreciate what you're saying about the diversity of the crew, in particular, the main characters. When I got to the end of this film, I was like, oh, she is a significant major character in this story.
Now imagine if they had created a TV series where she was a main bridge crew member.
Well, and there's also something to say about she comes from a society of people who are known for traits of sexuality. And again, I wonder now, and I'll double down on this, this is their version, this is in their eyes, in their own eyes, desirable, attractive.
Yeah, this is probably what it looks like to be attractive on Delta 4.
Yeah. And that emanates sexuality.
Yeah.
And that our version of that may have been different. But we've also seen, I'm not clueless. I know that in the original series, there's some short skirts and there's some female characters who are dancing around and there's some skimpy outfits, and that has its own purpose. But I like this direction.
And she gets her own skimpy outfit once
she does, yes.
Once she comes back. But yes, you're absolutely right. Well, we should say when the bridge is attacked by the entity known as V'ger, it kills Ilea, but then uses her as what the emissary should look like from V'ger. You know, a probe is sent to the Enterprise in order to observe all of the carbon-based life forms on the ship, because this machine does not understand why carbon-based units are required for a machine to operate. And so it sends a probe that looks like Ilea, and it has perfected its recreation of her down to thought waves and memories and all of that. So while it's significantly more robotic than Ilea ever was, it remembers Decker. It remembers Dr. Chapel.
It's like what later we would learn is a synthetic android. Is that what Picard becomes? I could be pulling language.
No, because that is them literally putting him essentially his soul into a synthetic body.
So this is some early version of that. Well, this is advanced science. Like this super intelligence.
It's advanced robotics to the degree that they have tinkered and toyed with various circuitry and this and that and different things in order to make her body operate like a human body, and in order to make her brain actually operate like a human brain. And they've sort of done it by accident.
Yeah.
You know, because they even say they may have made it too perfect. You know, they believe that they can then use her loyalty to Decker against V'ger if they can just get her to basically fall in love with Decker.
Yeah.
Again.
So her purpose as a probe, I feel it's even weird calling her Ilea or calling her, but her purpose as a probe is to come back to the ship, make observations. She has some kind of audiovisual device that's recording all of her interactions, and she's taking in data to better understand these, what do they call it? They're infesting.
Yeah. She believes the carbon-based units have infested the Enterprise.
Yes. Yeah. So kind of an interesting take.
And the idea is that she's going to take all that data back, and V'ger is going to take that data, register it, and then it's going to create additional copies so that those copies can now run the ship. Like, we don't need carbon-based units. We're going to create just other, machine forms of life, because these machines do not view carbon-based living entities as truly living at all.
Okay, so meanwhile, Spock.
I was going to say, now, but you're on it because all this is paralleling to Spock's own struggle.
He becomes a probe the other way. Like, he goes to this super intelligent machine, which how we see it is sort of it's in space. It's kind of, I don't know. At one point they call the opening or the doorway into the vessel or whatever.
It's a big sphincter.
They call it an orifice, and it does look like it has some weird biological, sometimes vaginal imagery here. But nonetheless, it's supposed to be advanced intelligence to the point of being machines. Like, at some point we're told this is machinery. This is
it comes from a planet of machinery.
So the
Transformers.
That's the weird juxtaposition. But he sends himself as a probe. He goes
without
rogue.
orders. Like, he sneaks down there, does his Vulcan nerve pinch on the poor dude with the porn stash. That guy falls down, and Spock loads himself up into a little a suit and goes out. So he is, in fact, going rogue the way that McCoy feared that he might, except it's not for his own edification. It's for the betterment of understanding what it is they're dealing with.
And two things come from this, at least for me. One is that he is in his own search. There's something about the superintelligence that entices him. And it could be that it has the answers. You know, this advanced intelligence has what he cannot attain, you know, pure logic. And he gets close enough to the entity that he perceives this. He's almost, weirdly, he's kind of overwhelmed. That's an emotion, but he's overwhelmed initially to realize that no emotion is sensed in this entity. It is nothing but what Spock calls pure logic. So the two things I would comment on here are one, it again kind of brings up the loneliness that I sense in Spock, that he is, you know, again, in a sense, he's in the state of rejection, searching for an answer, feeling uniquely alone in his journey, and wanting to know how he can achieve a level of purity that he feels he's meant to achieve.
Yes.
The second thing, and there's a sadness to that, you know, I sense that he is resisting his friends. He's resisting feeling the same level of attachment and exhilaration. And he's now just kind of trying to figure out how he can learn from this entity. The second thing that sits with me is that how he may know, he may not yet know this, but he is so critical to the mission that when Kirk says he needs him, he needs his friend, he truly means only Spock has the capacity to explain the logic of this entity to human beings. That in order to study, understand, and relay the patterns, the intelligence, the level of the abstract level of advancement here, he's such an essential part of this mission. And I almost wish, this is like a psychologist now talking, I wish for Spock, like, that loneliness is, yes, it's there, but you are so important. Like, your friends need, like, you're not this thing. You're not just this set of brainwaves. Like, you have such, you are essential. You're valued. You have purpose. I think that's where I'm going here, is like, you're not flailing about. You have such a distinct purpose here, and you're relied on. I don't know that he gets it yet. I think he's still in his exploratory journey, again, fixated on the superintelligence, that he's yet to come to that.
Right. What's interesting is when he does come to that, when he does realize that V'ger is just cold and nothing but pure logic, it actually harkens back to an episode of the original series in 66. Actually, you referenced it earlier, Amok Time. This is an episode where he goes back home in this sort of wedding ritual with his fiance, T'Pring, and ends up having to fight for her. And he ends up having to fight Kirk.
Okay.
Oddly enough, he ends up having to fight Kirk because Kirk is assigned to be the challenger instead of her real boyfriend, Stan. And at the end of the episode, as Spock lets her go, he realizes it's best if I just let the two of you do your own thing. And he asks her why she chose Kirk and why she did that. And she explains the whole thing. And he's like, that's purely logical. Great. But then he looks to Stan and says, Stan, T'Pring is yours, but you might find in time that having is not always so pleasing a thing as wanting. And that's always a quote that stuck with me. And you're seeing it here. Achieving the status of computer level, pure logic, no emotion, which is what they have been instilling in him from birth, is not actually a good thing after all. And so that's the moment in which we start to see him, we actually see Spock weep in this movie.
Yeah, there's something I want you to play for us, and I completely agree. He has this relatability. Like this connection to. I'm just going to call it V'ger. They're now calling it V'ger at this point in the movie. Correct. Anyway. So he has this connection to V'ger. Names all these things that are also existing in him. V'ger has an insatiable curiosity. V'ger wants to know. How V'ger can advance. How V'ger specifically wants to have answers.
It wants to speak to the creator.
Yeah. So a part of that is also, I think, Spock wrestling with the duality within him. And again, when I said before he has a purpose, it's not to achieve pure logic. That as he is both human and Vulcan, he matters greatly. Like he's essential as he is. He's still in a state of mind, or he's coming out of a state of mind where he does not believe that. He feels as though there's something more that he must attain. The irony of that is that's kind of what being human is. The ability to have that abstract wonder, that curiosity, that yearning, that desire. And I'm glad you brought up that he sees desire as a state of being that can be pleasurable. That's how I understood that to mean. And I don't know that a typical Vulcan would say something like that.
Well, it's a very logical statement. Okay. that you may have. I mean, desire is not anti-Vulcan. Mm-hmm. Knowing what you want is not an emotion in which Vulcans can't partake, but there is the logic that once you get it, it might not be what you thought it would be.
So I'd like you to play a couple things. One is just the audio of him after he mind melts with V'ger. So one of the first.
So this is him in sick bay, right? And let's play that for you now. Here we go.
V'ger has knowledge that spans this universe. And yet, with all its pure logic, V'ger is barren, cold, no mystery, no beauty. Should have known.
No. Spock. What should you have known? What should you have known?
Jim. This simple feeling is beyond V'ger's comprehension. No meaning, no hope. And Jim, no answers. It's asking questions. Is this all that I am? Is there nothing more?
So we should say at the end of that scene, he grabs Kirk's arm and the two of them embrace in a sort of a brotherly clasping of the hands. And that's when he says this simple, just this simple act, this simple emotion, this simple relationship is something that far exceeds anything V'ger can comprehend.
Yeah, it's a powerful moment because we're returning to Spock's loneliness. He had, up till this moment, believed that he was like more like V'ger than he was like Kirk, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the sense of knowing how empty V'ger is and that he doesn't want that.
Yeah.
That he has an appreciation for human compassion and connection. That's kind of a breakthrough for him, I think. That's the first part of his breakthrough.
Absolutely.
The second part of his breakthrough is when we actually see him tearing up. So there's a moment where his back is to us, he turns around, and there's like a single tear coming from his eye. I don't know that about you, but I've never seen Spock cry. So this must be a big deal.
It's an even bigger deal in Next Generation when Spock's father, Sarek, weeps, and it's seen more as like dementia. Like, oh, he's losing control of his faculties. Like Sarek is now becoming emotional. He must be nearing the end of his life. Like, he's losing it. So for Spock to have a tear in this moment, Spock has had a particular realization that might not have hit other Vulcans for years and years and years. But here we go. We can take a listen to this conversation now.
I weep for V'ger as I would for a brother. As I was when I came aboard. So is V'ger now. Empty, incomplete, and searching. Logic and knowledge are not enough.
Spock, are you saying that you've found what you needed, but V'ger hasn't?
What would V'ger need to fulfill itself?
Each of us, at some time in our lives, turns to someone, a father, a brother, a god, and asks, why am I here? What was I meant to be? V'ger hopes to touch its creator, to find its answers.
We're not going to talk about the fact yet that it turns out Spock does have a brother, but that's for that is for a future episode.
Oh, wow. I think here too is Spock's, it's his acknowledgement and embrace. I mean, there's a lot going on, right? The fact that he's expressing emotion through tears, I believe, is a huge breakthrough, that he allows himself to be human. Because I understand this to not be a Vulcan trait, not a Vulcan
he was
behavior.
doing it in private. His back was turned to them.
Let him cry in the corner. Like, that's
his back
also,
was
that's
turned
so
to them.
interesting. Yeah, I mean, that says a lot too, right? Like, left alone, maybe in his own room, would he cry just without anyone seeing him? Because it would be shameful. It would be un-Vulcan-like to do this. It's against the culture, so he may feel resistant to that. But he openly weeps in front of his friends. Mm-hmm. And there's a sense here too that I think with the dialogue helping us relate to this idea that while this superintelligence is fantastic, while the superintelligence has surpassed all of humanity in its capacities, humans have something in their own capacity which a machine can never acquire. Something vulnerable, something that has, again, a vastness that is, I think, in some way, something that Spock is finding to be very valuable. He went from feeling like emotions were lacking value and lacking purpose to acknowledging that by being so close to V'ger, that is not how he wants to be.
Right.
He wants to have the capacity to wonder, to be curious beyond just the facts, but to be able to expand his mind in an emotional way. And I just feel like this is kind of his, in a way, like this is his film, like this is his story, told through this this analogy or this closeness to AI. I mean, what a timely situation. We're talking about how AI
might take over the planet.
No, how AI has its advantages, but can't truly replicate something that we call our own.
Yeah. But we want to make clear, we're talking about real AI, not what a lot of people are calling AI. But also, you say that this is Spock's film, and I think that you're right. But I also feel like this is a lot of people's film within this movie. I mean, we do start to see the beginnings of what will be Kirk's character throughout the arc of these next several movies. In this film, the need to be in the captain's chair, the need to go on those adventures, to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go.
Yeah.
No.
Well, and to tie this back to Spock.
I'm getting away from Spock.
I know, but I want to tie this to Spock only to say that, maybe tie it more generally that, yes, I think this mission solidified purpose for everybody. I mean,
it solidifies purpose for Decker as well. Like Decker believes at the beginning of this movie that he has been robbed of his opportunity to be the captain of a starship, and that he has overseen the refitting of the Enterprise and holds it against Kirk. I mean, he straight up he's like, may I speak frankly, may I speak openly, and says, this is about you needing to take this away from me because you don't like being behind a desk. And Kirk has to come to terms with the fact that might be true when McCoy even has that conversation that you were talking about and that we heard. But in the end of the movie, Decker realizes that his higher purpose is actually love.
Okay, so yeah,
and is actually to connect with V'ger.
So let's talk about the ending of this movie.
Yeah,
and what V'ger really is.
You have been introduced to V'ger personally, Drea, in a trip to JPL in Pasadena, Jet Propulsion Lab. Our friend Bob Back gave us a tour, and there on the tour is, I believe, an identical Voyager probe. Voyager is the probe that we sent into space to constantly send us information back on what it was learning about the solar system. The further it got, and the longer it took, the more it got to a point where we didn't need that information necessarily as much. We stopped receiving the transmissions. And that's ultimately what really angered V'ger was, I don't understand. Why are you not communicating back with me? Why are you not letting me give you all of the knowledge I have acquired? I need to speak to the creator.
Well, and there's some interaction with a alien machine species.
Yes, at some point in time, the Voyager probe went into a black hole. That black hole then sent it into a wormhole onto a planet, crash landed onto a planet of machines. The machines found it, thought of it as one of its own, created, repaired it, created more stuff around it.
And things got out of hand.
Sort of made it sentient.
Yeah, I mean, right. So now V'ger has consciousness. The Planet of the Apes of this all is that V'ger is something that humans created and now is a primary source of destruction. Our
unwillingness to talk to our offspring,
I
to
mean,
communicate back to our offspring, or
well, and I mean the shocking ending, the surprise ending, if you will, is that this is a very familiar. This is not an alien.
Right.
I mean, it is to some degree.
This is Voyager 6.
But this is a very familiar object, one that we produced.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that there is a responsibility that we let go of, but I am saying that this has kind of that twist that that really sits with you.
That's what you're referring to, Planet of the Apes.
Yes,
You're referring to the fact that it was Earth all along.
Yeah. This is yes. So the thing that I'm curious about, and I think I want further explanation, is that so the probe basically says it's not so much we need the creator to connect, like we need to join. V'ger needs to join with the creator. Decker volunteers himself. He will essentially
take on the proxy of creator.
Yeah, so he will represent humanity. He'll
and by the way,
represent
V'ger sabotages itself because they do upload this ancient code to them, a couple hundred years old at this point, ancient code to them, and V'ger begins to transmit, except it refuses to take the last part of the code. And when they open it up, they realize that the wires have been destroyed, and they realize that it's a fresh, it's fresh. Like V'ger did it itself. And it's like, no. I refuse to transmit this data. I must speak to the creator face to face.
Right, and
we have to combine. We have to merge.
Well, I need to be one. I need to join. I mean, something again, weirdly human. Like the message can't simply be communicated to me in this binary code or whatever. I need to have touch. Like I need to be physically in touch. And then I guess my question for you is, and I really mean this, if the probe was in a different body, let's just say Chekhov. Let's just say for some reason V'ger zapped Chekhov back to its vessel and then created a probe that looked, acted, sounded just like Chekhov. Would Decker volunteer?
No.
So was this, do you see what I'm getting at? Like, what is his real...
Decker's made it very
happening?
Clear from the beginning, or at least I should say from the moment Ilea stands on the bridge.
Okay.
He has a deep love and affection for her, and she for him. And when she's taken away, but clearly still has the memories and still has the affection. And by the way, this could also be V'ger expressing that as well. Like, oh, we have created this probe that is basically our proxy. This is how we communicate with you from this point forward. And she's got the hots for you because of who that person was before her. It's very possible that they're like, no, this needs to end this way. We need to merge, and with that, we will basically transmit all of the information. My understanding, and I could be wrong.
Sure.
I have been wrong in the past. By that, I mean the last episode. My interpretation is that humanity didn't get all this data. Like this data, there is so much information that Voyager has achieved that this is like a godlike being at this point. It knows everything. And yet humanity isn't ready for that. So the moment V'ger and Decker combine, Decker becomes the vessel for all of that information. Decker does become a godlike being, and the two of them unite and become godlike together.
That I agree.
And,
I agree
and
with
they
that.
say, did we just witness the birth of a new life form?
So
yes, we did.
What was Decker's motivation? What did he
Ilea.
think?
knowing that the thing that he loved, that the person he loved was still in there somewhere, and the idea of leaving this thing behind to go command a starship, it's like Kirk got what he wanted. He gets the Enterprise. Decker gets what he wants, what he ultimately wants, which is his love with Ilia. Ilia gets what she wants, her love with Decker. V'ger gets what it wants, its connection to the creator. And everybody goes home happy. The Earth is not in jeopardy anymore because now they have, and they even say this at the end of the film, they believe that they have set up V'ger to move throughout the universe with its own sense of purpose. It does not need to relay its information back to the creator anymore.
It's satisfied.
It can now
Yeah.
take the information for itself rather than serve the purpose of another life form.
I was left a bit confused about Decker, but now knowing that Ilia was the motivation. Thank you for explaining love to me. That was the one part of the movie I wasn't sure about. What a
Kirk
touching
has his
story.
love of the ship.
Yeah, no, and Spock and Spock.
And he even says it. Decker even says it. I want to do this. And Kirk is like, I'm not going to let a member of my crew sacrifice himself.
Mm-hmm.
And Decker says, as much as you wanted the Enterprise, I want this. Like, he's basically backhanding Kirk to be like,
and I kind of got that because I think that was saying you have this desire, you have this great love, as do I. Do not question, and what I'm doing is questioning it. I'm like, I don't get it. I'm questioning it, but that's probably what that statement is about. Is
and purpose.
don't take this away from me.
Yeah.
This is my love,
Yep.
right? And I was going to say Spock also achieves some kind of integration here, which is a sense of purpose for himself
Yes.
and appreciating who he is, both Vulcan and human. I very much like the way that this all kind of is reconciled. This is a very touching ending.
Yeah. I'll be curious to see
yeah.
if this ends up being your favorite of
Wouldn't that be funny?
of the movies. Where it's like, yeah. I don't know. I was going to ask you what you thought of the film because I went into it expecting you to be like, God, we got to do 5 more of these.
If the other 5 are like this, I'm all in. It's only logical. I have no notes. No,
logical.
I literally just closed my notebook.
But it is not only logical, it is also emotional because we've
Right,
learned that that's
right.
what is needed.
Yes, yeah, no, fully understand that. I have closed my notebook, no more notes. Like I am.
Then I'm very
I'm
excited
done.
to see what you think going forward. And I will say this, folks. If you have comments, questions, if you want to relay your thoughts about not just this film, but the films going forward, we're going to give you a little bit of an incentive here. Drea and I just, when we returned from our vacation, we were greeted by a package sitting at our doorstep. We have brand new enamel pins featuring the artwork by Kian Tormey and our logo. And we are going to make you a deal. For those of you with questions, thoughts, suggestions, personal stories, if you go to drdreapsychology.com and you give us a voice message on SpeakPipe, or if you go to Twitter at Arkham Sessions and you leave us a thought or a question, or if you go to Facebook or our Discord, etc., the best question, comment, suggestion each week will get one of these enamel pens for free. We'll discuss how we get it to you later. But you will get one for free. Otherwise, you will be able to pick one up from somewhere that we have not yet decided. But we would love to interact with you. We would love a little, some of your thoughts and your questions. So come get an enamel pin.
You can leave a message at drdreapsychology.com/the Arkham Sessions podcast. Again, drdreapsychology.com/the Arkham Sessions podcast. Orange button, press it. It's about 2 minutes. So hopefully enough time to leave your comment or question. Again, we'll pick the best comment or question for each episode and send a pin your way.
I want to take this opportunity to thank some of our patrons who have made this episode possible. Dr. Jerome Anderson, Antonio Lopez, Candy B, Kevin Ortel, Todd Stashwick, Heroes Journey Fitness, Frank Moeller, Mark Pepper, Emily Higgins, Swara Salih, Carl Ward, Michael Pruitt, Eric O'Sullivan, Rachel Acevedo Hoffman, Zach Neal, Ruben Gonzalez, and Dr. Girlfriend. Thank you so much for your support. You too can support us by going over to patreon.com and finding the Arkham Sessions. A number of tiers there, a number of perks. So come join us and join the conversation. Drea, otherwise, why don't you tell the folks where they can find you online?
You can find me on social media. I am at Arkham Asylum Doc. You can also find me on my website, drdreapsychology.com.
You can find me on Twitter. I am at bward028 and on Instagram at b_ward028. Like I said, you can find us on Twitter as at Arkham Sessions or on Instagram at the Arkham Sessions. Come follow us on Facebook. Follow our family over at Fanbase Press. And until next time, I'm Brian Ward.
I'm Dr. Drea Letamendi.
And together we are
the Arkham Sessions.
You're off.